So today I'm going to be talking to you about how to finish off all of these ends. So how to end your crochet and how to weave in the ends or finish off the ends. I've got some different little bits and pieces here to show you. So here I've got just a continuous round. So I've been going around and around in a circle here. I'm going to show you how to finish that end and then what to do with the two ends. So here I started with a magic ring, so I will show you how to finish off a magic ring as well. Here I've just got some rows of crochet, so I'll show you how to, if I was going to just stop there, and then I will also show you how, if I was starting another colour, how to crochet over the top of the ends and hold them in place as you go. Here I've got a little granny square that I haven't quite finished off yet, so I got to my last round and I need to join this one to here and then finish off my ends as well. So just to show you how to do that when your work is a little bit more gappy than if you were working just with single crochet. So I will also show you how to do an invisible join with a round like this. So I'll show you how, if you're working in continuous rounds like this and perhaps your work is like this, so maybe you're making a little face scrubby or something like that, and you want it to be nice and neat at the end, I will show you how to do an invisible join as well. Okay, so let's get going. So let's start with our little granny square here and show you how to finish that one off. Okay, so here I've got my last stitch, so my last double crochet. And what I need to do at the very end is I need to join it to my first stitch. Now my first stitch here was standing double, so I've got my two ends underneath here, so I'm going to go underneath my stitch here, and then what I'm going to do is do just a slip stitch. So what that means is I just bring the yarn through my stitch and then bring it straight through the loop that's on my hook, just like that. And then I've finished my crochet. But now what I need to do is I need to pull that loop a little bit long so that it's not going to go anywhere. I'm going to cut off my yarn, leaving a nice long tail. So nice long tail so that I can weave it in. And then I'm just going to pull that tail through this loop. There we go. And I'm just going to pull that through. And that's made a little tiny knot on the top of my crochet. So now, always when you finish a crochet, you've got two ends. So I've got the end that I just finished, and I've got my starting end as well that I need to weave in. So if I don't weave in my ends, then my crochet can eventually come undone, even though I've made a tiny little knot there by pulling the end through the loop. It's not really secure. If I wanted to, I could actually just unpick it and it would all come apart. So we need to secure this end. And the way that we do that is we weave it through the back of the stitches that we've got. So I'm going to take that end and I'm going to put it onto my yarn needle. So here I've got a needle with a blunt end. I will also show you how to weave in your ends with a sharp-ended needle, because sometimes that can be more secure than doing it with a blunt. So this is how I normally thread my needle. So I put my yarn over my needle like that and I pinch it really close to the needle and I pull out my needle and then I can push that through the eye of my needle just like that and pull it through. Right, so now I've got my yarn on my needle. I'm going to turn my work over to the back. So if you have a close look at the back of your stitches, you will see that they look slightly different than the front. So the back of your stitches will always have this kind of bumpy look, and the front of your stitches, it looks neater. So it's got these kind of wraps where you were working. So turn over to the back, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to push my needle into the back of my stitches, just like this. And to be honest, it doesn't really matter where you go, as long as you're in the back of your stitches and not showing on the front. So I try and pick up the back of at least one stitch like that and pull it through. And then you can see I've got all these bits here where I crocheted over the chain from the round below. So if I put my needle into that, I can go underneath all those loops and come out. and then I should go back in the other direction, because if I only go in one direction, there is a chance that, you know, with like moving around like this when it's being used, or when whatever you're going to do with this square, it could still come out. So if I go back in the other direction, so I can't just put my needle in here because then I will undo all my stitches. So I just go one stitch a bit further and then go back in the other direction and pull my yarn through. And you can do that a few times over different stitches. So if I go through the back of here, I can go into these. So you can go as far as you like. The more you do, the more secure your yarn is going to be. So that's one thing. So go backwards and forwards in a few different directions underneath a few of your stitches. And now that tail should be secure. So now I can cut it off, and I can cut it close to my work, like that. And now my tail is secure. So here I've got the tail from my magic ring, which I started my granny square with. Now for this, you want to make this really secure. So people sometimes do have issues with magic rings coming undone, and that's really because they haven't pulled them tight enough and they haven't finished them off properly. So you need to really pull your magic ring completely tight so that there is no gap here. And then here I'm going to take my needle with the sharp point. And the reason for that is because then I can weave it into the strands of my yarn. So I'm going to do the same to thread my needle. It's a little bit smaller, so just going to do that exactly what I did before. And here I'm going to go around underneath these stitches in one direction and then back in the other direction. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and split my yarn strands. So I'm actually going to push my yarn into the stitches so that it's really, really woven in and out of the stitches, just like that. And I'm going to go in again around here, and then I'm going to go back in the other direction. So each time with the magic ring, because you want to pull it really tight, so pull your stitches tight, and then you can go back in the other direction. And yes, with this sharp needle I'm able to really split the strands of my yarn so that I can really get my yarn right in there and have less likelihood that it's going to come undone. Okay, so often with a magic ring I do that a few times in different directions, and honestly I have never had one come undone. So that's how we finish off a magic ring. And now I can just cut my yarn again close to where I finished. There we go, and that's my granny square finished off. Right, so I had some other things that I wanted to show you. So this one here, I wanted to show you how to work over the top of some stitches that you have, so how to hide your ends as you go. So here I've got some stitches in this yellow. I'm going to cut off this end here, leaving a bit of a tail. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to join a different colour. So I do have another video about joining different colours and working in stripes and things like that, but here my aim is to really finish to show you how to weave in the ends as you go. So that's what we're going to do here. So I've got my other yarn, and I am just going to pull it through, and I'm going to start working with my other yarn. So I've got two tails here, still quite long. I'm going to just go one stitch up, and I'm going to start. So I'm not going to do it from the first stitch because it's a bit easier to just show you, but you should really do this from the first stitch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide these ends in my single crochet. So sometimes it's difficult to hide both ends because that's quite, especially with this type of yarn, because it's quite fat, but sometimes you can. So what I need to do is I'm just going to put them in the back. So let's say that here my work did have a back and a front. So I'm going to put them in the back, and I'm going to crochet into my stitch, but grabbing those ends in the middle. So can you see where my ends are? they're under here, and then my stitch is going to come over the top and hide them behind. So can you see my ends are actually caught in my stitch? So I put them in the back next to my stitch. I go underneath those two ends into my single crochet. Oops, not showing you because I'm off the screen. Bring my yarn through and then bring it through again like I would completing my stitch. So maybe I'll just show you that again. So yarn tails in front of your work, put your hook underneath your yarn tails and into your stitch, and then finish off your stitch. So bring it through there, trapping the yarn tails in like that. And that way you can actually you can enclose your ends as you go. So now my ends are actually finished off. So if I continue all the way to the end of my row, I've got enough secure weaving in of my ends or crocheting over the top of my ends that I can just cut the ends off and not actually have to weave them in at all. So that's one way of kind of finishing your ends as you go. Right, now then, the last one is my round, and here I'm going to show you what you would normally do to finish off, so with a slip stitch versus doing what's called an invisible join. So here I already cut my yarn, so I've already got my tail. So basically I want to join this stitch here with this stitch here, so I'm working in continuous rounds, so I didn't go up and go around. I just need to join my crochet to this stitch here. So normally what I would do, I would just do a slip stitch. So yarn in my stitch, bring it through, bring it straight through that stitch, and then I would bring this tail all the way through this loop and pull it tight. I'm not going to pull it too tight because I'm going to undo it. So pull it tight and then weave in the ends like I already showed you in the back of my work. So go around and around in the backs of my stitches until it's secure. But what you can also do is actually do this finishing, and I'm going to undo it and do it again now with an invisible join. So if I just undo that. Right, so what we're going to do with the invisible join, so this is really my last loop where I finished my last single crochet, and I want to be able to join it to this loop here. So what I'm going to do is I cut my yarn and I'm going to just pull it through exactly where I am. So I'm not doing another stitch, I'm just pulling the yarn all the way through. And what I want to do now, what the invisible join does, is it makes a stitch on top of this by using a needle. So we're going to thread our yarn onto a needle and we're going to weave it in the same direction as we would if we were actually doing this kind of stitch on the top. So I'll show you what I mean. So basically pop your yarn tail onto your needle like this. Okay, and now I'm going to put my yarn one stitch ahead, so here, so that I can follow the path of this stitch on the top. So I'm going to put it there and I'm going to pull it all the way through. And now you'll see that this bit of yarn here lies almost where that stitch was. So if I put my yarn into that stitch again, so back into my stitch that I started with, and just pull it, what you can see is we will make a kind of fake stitch on the top. So now you really can't tell that there is a join here. So we made this kind of fake stitch on the top. You can pull it up so that it's snug and the same width as the other stitches, and then you really cannot tell. So then what you want to do is also turn over to the back and just pop your yarn into that loop of the previous stitch just to hold it in place. And don't pull too tight. If you pull too tight, then this fake stitch that you made on the top is going to disappear. So you want it to stay there and look like it was a stitch. And now I hope that you can see that that's really, you can't tell. There's no little bobble on the top where you did a slip stitch and then a knot. And then, just as before, what we now need to do with our yarn end is to weave it through the back of some stitches here. So I would just put my needle underneath some of the loops and go up and down a little bit just to keep it in place. So pick up some loops. You're not going into your work so that it comes out on the right side, but I would just go backwards and forwards a bit through some loops until your yarn feels really secure. And I would go back in the other direction as well, just to be even more secure. And like I showed you before, you can also do this with a sharp needle instead of a blunt one. So here I am using a blunt needle because I wanted to show you how to put it in exactly the right place for the finishing part. But if you use a sharp needle, you can actually like pick up different strands of yarn and push your end in between the strands, which will make it more secure. So then I'm just going to cut my end. I still need to do my other end, but I'm not going to do that because I already showed you. And I hope you can see that that's a nice clean join with no real bumps. And that's how to join and how to finish and how to weave in ends.